At 11:40 p.m, the Titanic struck an iceberg, which was between 50 and 100 feet above the level of the sea. She was travelling at around 22 knots. Most passengers had retired for the night, and although some people felt the impact, many were oblivious to their immediate danger.
We had music that night. A band was playing. We went to bed, say, 10:30, and all of a sudden the ship sort of went into the iceberg. Because she was going full speed, she was thrown back. The second time she did the same thing, and the third time she stopped dead. So my father said he'd go up on deck and see what's wrong. So he went up on the deck and he came back and says, "You'd better get dressed and come up on deck." He says they've only struck the iceberg.
My mother felt this little bump, as she always described it, because we were a very long way from it. We were on the port side of the ship, and the iceberg was on the starboard side of the ship. If she'd been asleep, it wouldn't have wakened her. It didn't wake anybody else in the cabins around about there at all. But she was wide awake, and she felt this bump and immediately wakened my father. He wasn't very pleased about this, as she wakened him the night before and made him go up on deck, because she heard something that she thought was untoward. That had been ice floes in the sea bumping against the side of the ship. So when she called him on the Sunday night, he wasn't very pleased about it. And then she wakened me, and she didn't say why, but she said, "I'm going to dress you." And I said, "Oh, no, you're not," and went and got back into bed. By that time, my father had been up to the boat deck in a lift, which was quite close by our cabin. He'd been up there, and he came back, and all he said to her was, "You'd better put this thick coat on that I've got on." And she stood up, and he put his coat on her. I used to ask my mother many years afterwards, "When he came back down, you didn't say to him, 'What was it?'" She said, "I didn't have to. I didn't know what it was, but I didn't have to ask. I knew this something that had been over my head for months, and there it was, a great black cloud." Anyway, my father put another coat on, and he picked me up. He wrapped a blanket around me, and we went up onto the boat deck, and got there, of course, quite quickly.
The night it happened, we were all in the cabin, and my mother and father, they heard a crash. My father said he'd go up on deck to see what had happened. He went up on deck and said apparently the ship had struck an iceberg. Get the children out of bed and up on deck as quick as possible. That's what my mother did. They never stopped to think the ship is unsinkable, as some did, and we got on deck, I think with the help of a sailor.
These third-class passengers, Southern European people, were streaming up on deck, and I went down. I think it was 2 decks down, without removing any hatches or anything. I went down to the side, and I walked along there and looked in the cross passages. I couldn't hear any noise. I couldn't see any damage. And I eventually came up on deck again. As I was emerging on the deck, some of these men were on their way back again to their beds. And there was one man had a piece of ice, and I took it away out of his hands, wondering where he got it from. And I spoke to him in English and tried to make him understand that it was nothing, there was nothing the matter. Go down and go to bed and go to sleep again, you see. And I took this piece of ice and walked along the upper deck on the starboard side to see where the ice came from.
My father never said anything, but he was smoking a cigar, and just as I told you, he went up on deck to see what the trouble was. Then he came back and told us to get dressed and come up on deck. And then, of course, we stayed there. We must have been there for over an hour before anything happened. Nobody worried about it. A lot of the people from the third class must have come up, playing with the ice on deck. A lot of them, and people in the first class, they wouldn't believe it. They said, "Oh, she's unsinkable," and they went back to bed. And everybody kept saying, "She's unsinkable, she won't go down, she's unsinkable."
I was in my cabin then. We had a cabin for 6, and we were discussing what we would do when we all arrived back in Southampton, and all of a sudden, she came to a halt. Well, there's no impact as such, just like jamming your brakes on your car, and, well, that was that. She'd stopped. Now, we had a porthole open, and I looked out, and the sky was clear, the stars were shining, and the sea was dead calm. Of course, what had happened, we'd slipped over the iceberg, and although she was supposed to be unsinkable with a double bottom, the iceberg had cut her from forward on the starboard side to the engine room, almost amidships, right through her two bottoms.